Welcome. In this video tutorial we're going to use the Pixlr image editor from pixlr.com, P-I-X-L-R, to create a graphic from a number of different photographic elements and basically from scratch. So first let's click Pixlr and we're going to choose the Pixlr editor. Now this time we're going to click Create a New Image. And we're going to make the width 1280 pixels by 720 pixels. And as we've discussed, this is HD, an HD frame size, also referred to as 720p. So 1280 width, 720 height, and click OK. And what we get is a big blank canvas. Now let me go to File, Open Image, and in my folder where I have saved my image assets, I created a demo.pxt, and that's the Pixlr document. I'm going to open that up, and here's a look at the demo of what we'll be creating here. There's a number of assets and a number of elements involved in this image. First, we're going to utilize image elements, and you can use the photo that you chose to utilize from Flickr previously, or you can use another image. That's fine. We're also going to use a gradient, and you can see the gradient up here, sort of a black to transparent over the top of the picture. We're going to use shapes, and in this image, these black bars here are shapes. We'll look at a variety of ways to create shapes, and then also the ability to add text to your image. Now, this is just a demo, and I'm stepping through a number of steps to show you how to use these different tools. Feel free, you don't have to create a duplicate of this demo. Once again, this tutorial is just here to give you the tools to create your own graphic. If you want to create a similar graphic, feel free. So I'll leave the creative license up to you. I'm going to close this now and we'll start from scratch. Let's go back to our blank canvas, our 1280 by 720. First, let's bring in the image elements. We've already worked with image resizing, with cropping. Let's work with photographic elements again. I'm going to go to my folder and say Open Image, the folder where I have my photo assets saved. I'm going to spread this out, and I still have this copy of my original image, and I'm going to grab that and use it again. I use the copy so that I'm not editing the original, so I always have the original at my disposal, but the copy is available for me to open up and bring into the editor and work with as well. So I'm going to open that up. Great. And the first thing I'm going to do, similar to our previous tutorial, is crop out a section. I'm going to click the crop tool. I'm going to constrain it to output size, and I'm going to give it the output of 1280 by 720. And I'll have my cropping crosshairs here. I hold down and crop out a section. I think that'll be good. I can move this around just a shade. I'll double click, and that crops that element for me. Now I have this piece of photograph that I want to paste into my new canvas that I've created. So I go to Edit, select all, Edit, Copy, and you can use the Control-C, Control-V, those kind of things, shortcuts. You can click Copy, and now I will move this over and click onto my white canvas. Now we're going to use layers in this project, and we have a widget over here that enables us to use the layers. Right now we have a background that's white. We're going to leave that white. This little icon right here will create a new layer. I can also create a new layer by going to the layer menu and saying new layer. Either way, it's same effect. And I have a layer now called layer 1. And I know it's selected when it's highlighted in blue, so I'll click on layer 1. And now I have the photograph that I copied from that other image. And now if I go to edit and paste, what will happen is I paste that image right onto our canvas. Oh, and it looks like it creates its own layer. So I have layer 1 and now I have layer 2, which is that photograph, which works for our purposes. If you want to delete a layer, like this layer 1 is actually empty, so I'm going to delete it by just selecting it and clicking on this trash can icon, delete the layer, or I can go to layer and delete the layer since it's selected, delete. So now I have my background image and my photograph. While we're here, let's name this layer, and I'll call this photo background. And naming layers really will be helpful as we start to get more layers so that we know what element is on which layer. Note that I can grab my move tool, which is this arrow here, and I can click on this photographic element and I can move it around. Great, and I've moved it back, and you can see sort of the white background here. When you have the move tool selected, you can also use the arrow keys for fine movement. So I can move it up 1 pixel at a time until the white disappears, and I know I have my canvas all covered. So once again, you can use the move tool to drag around on a layer, or you can use those arrows for fine movement. Now the next step, let's right click or control click on this layer in the layer widget, and let's choose duplicate layer, and that does just what it sounds like, and it creates a copy. I'm going to rename this new copy. I'm going to call this photo foreground. And what I'm going to do with the foreground is go up to adjustment, and I'm going to turn it black and white. I'm going to choose desaturate. Now notice that the layer that I see right now is the foreground, which is the black and white layer. This check mark here means whether a layer is visible or not. If I uncheck it, I now have the colored layer, which is the background. This is the one that's visible. If I select, oops, it switched on me. If I again click this layer here to make it visible, then I get the black and white effect. I am going to, with this foreground layer selected, click this icon here, which are my settings for the layer. And when I do that, I get a small menu right here which enables me to change the opacity. Now opacity is transparency, so if I move this down, that means I'm getting 40% transparency on this black and white layer, which means that the colored layer is coming through that transparent layer. As I move the opacity up, it moves back towards the black and white. So opacity can be a useful toggle between layer elements. I'm going to leave my opacity at around 80. And now for mode, I'm going to choose hard light, and what that's going to do is going to give a slight lighting effect to my black and white layer and kind of create this intense lighting. So now I have a hard light coming down on the black and white layer, which is over the top of the just the plain color layer, and it gives it a quality, sort of an intensity of colors. Now there's probably a filter that would mimic this similar effect, but we wanted to build the effect from scratch. And so you start to understand how by putting layers and elements on top of each other and changing with elements such as the light and the opacity, you can get a certain quality or effect. Now's a good time to go to File and Save. And what we're going to be doing is saving, this time in a format PXD. This is the Pixlr document format, and what it does is it says it's a layered image. It will remember your layers, so you can open this document file back up in Pixlr and you will get all of your work in the different layers and the different elements. So what this is an editable document, whereas a JPEG is just a single layer. So let's choose a PXD for our format, and I'm going to name this last name underscore 522 underscore, and I'm going to call this graphic. Go ahead and use this naming convention if you like, and then what I'm going to do is save this into, I'm going to click OK and save it into the image assignment folder, which I created for during the last tutorial, and I saved all my my images of different sizes for the sizing and cropping assignment. I'm just going to save my graphic element here too. Now you're going to need this PXD to turn in as one of the deliverables for the assignment, and it's a good idea to save as we go along, just so you don't lose your work. So I'm going to click Save. Great, and now that name is reflected up here. In the Layers widget here, we still have our settings visible, so I'm going to close those settings, that way I can see each of my layers. That's it for the photographic elements in this tutorial. The next set of tools I would like to share with you is the gradient tool. To do this, I'm going to create a new layer. I'll call this gradient. And the two photo layers, I'm going to unclick the check marks so they become invisible. And now all I see is the background and this gradient layer. We can always call them back up, and we will again. The gradient tool is here, and when I choose the gradient tool, I get a sub-menu across the top. I can play with things such as the opacity of the gradient, and I can choose the gradient color schema. There's some crazy color schemas here, rainbow, some pre-built ones that are interesting, but might not necessarily fit the scope of your assignment. The project that you're building. What I use most often is a black to transparent gradient, a white to transparent gradient, or a color to color gradient. Now if I choose the, say for example, the white to transparent gradient, and you can see that it's transparent because you get this little checker box here. It goes from the white to the transparent. I could choose a color. So here's the color picker. On the outside, I'm going to move this towards the greens. And now in the inside, I have a number of greens I can choose. If you know the exact hexadecimal number for a color, you can type that in there. It's always 6 digits. But we can choose a color. And once I choose a color, this will be the color that I choose. I click OK. And note now that's reflected. So now when I make a gradient, it would be green. I'm not going to use a green though. I'm actually going to use a black gradient. Now I've chosen this, I'll just click away, and that will menu will go away. Now let's look at the canvas. I'm on my gradient layer, so I can do some demos here. I will click down and drag my crosshairs, and I'll just pull down a bit, and when I let go, I get a gradient that starts at the top in black, and then it goes transparent down the page, and because my background is white, it goes from black to white. This is called a linear gradient, meaning that the gradient moves linearly from one color to the other. And you can see the type up here. Let's click undo. and check out a radial gradient, I will click down, pull the crosshair, and I get a circular gradient. We can try different spread methods. Let's try a reflection on a radial. And we get this reflection at the end of the gradient, then it starts to reflect back. A number of settings and modes that you can play with. For this demo, I'm just going to use a regular radial gradient. But hopefully you've seen the different options for different kinds of gradients. Just to remind you, any element on a layer becomes movable. So now I have this gradient here. If I choose the move tool, I can grab it and move it, and this whole thing will move. Now's a good time to show you too. I could choose my marquee tool or selection tool, select an area, go to edit, cut, and the area that I just chose or selected with that tool will get cut out of the element. Now I'm just going to go undo a few times until I get back to my base layer. Let's call up our photographic elements again. What I would like is just a nice black linear gradient that starts black here at the top, pulls down, and sort of peaks out around the top of this flower here. So it gives this effect of that there's black behind, and then it kind of fades into the image. So I have my empty layer titled gradient. I'm going to choose the gradient tool. It's black. I'm going to choose linear. I'm going to start at the top and then just do a small gradient. Oops, I'm going to step back, undo, and for spread method it's just going to be pad. Okay, try again. Just a small one. I'd like it a little bigger, and I find that I always pull small areas of my gradient until I start to feel good about it. And it gives me an idea of how I want to blend. Now I like the feeling of this gradient, sort of the length of the transparency, but it goes down a little farther than I like, so I'm going to click the move tool. Now I could just click and move it with my arrow, but instead I'm going to, or with my mouse, instead I'm going to use my arrow keys and just slowly click up, and the gradient will move up. And I think that looks pretty good. So now that I have a gradient over the top excuse me, of my photographic elements, I'm going to save this again. Click Save. Just leave the format and the name the same. Click OK and save it to the same place. Click Save, and this time it's going to prompt me to replace the previous document. Sure, please update it. I have my gradient and my photographic layers. I'm going to merge all of these into a single element, onto a single layer, so that I can move them around and then I can build more graphical layers on top. So to merge elements from multiple layers into a single layer, I'm going to go to Layer, Merge Visible. Now it merged with my background layer too, which is currently locked, so I'm going to double click and that will open up my layer. I'll give this the name Photo Elements, and that's my my merged layers, all the elements merged into a single element. I'm going to add a new layer now and click back on my photo elements layer, select my arrow tool, the move tool, And now I can move this around on my timeline. I'm going to move this whole element up, and I can use my arrow keys or my mouse once again to do this. I'm going to give myself about that much space. Now you can see down here at the bottom we have this transparency, this checkerboard, which means this is part of the canvas, but right now we don't have any elements there. I'd like to grab this empty layer here and just move it right below by dragging it, selecting and dragging. Layer 4, I'm going to call this, oops, just swapped on me. I'm going to call this background, and we'll drag that back down, let it go. I'm going to go to edit, oops, select all, and that's going to select the whole area of the canvas, and I'm going to fill it with white. And the way that I do that is I first go to my photos selector, or excuse me, my color selector, which opens back up. We saw this before. In the middle, I'm going to pull my color selector up to the white area, and now I have a nice white here. I click OK, and this is going to be the color that I fill with. It's demonstrated right here, and my fill tool looks like a paint bucket. So I select the paint bucket, and I go into the area that's selected. You can see the moving lines in this rectangle that move around the whole image, and if I just click, it's going to fill it with white. Now because my background layer was selected, it filled the whole background layer. So if I make this layer photo elements and invisible, note that my whole canvas is now white again. Great. I'm going to go to edit, deselect, and now I have this area down here that I can work with and put the title for the course. So the next area that I'd like to cover, and the next area in the assignment, is creating shapes within the editor. So let's click on the photo element layer, add a new layer right on top. I'm going to call this shapes, and I'm going to go to my photo elements layer, uncheck it so I can't see it. That way we can demonstrate a number of different shape techniques. The easiest way for me, I like to use the marquee tool. You can also use the drawing tool, which gives you sort of a paintbrush that you can work with, or excuse me, a sort of a pencil tool that you can work with. But I like to work with shapes using the marquee tool. So I'm going to click on the marquee, and up here we see in the sub menu I have the rectangle is chosen. So when I pull down onto my canvas, click and then pull, I can create various rectangular shapes. If I look over here in my navigator, I can get an idea of the width and height of a shape. Once you let go, it's selected. You can go to edit, deselect all, or Control D to deselect what you had. Now if you want a perfect square, you can maintain the aspect ratio by giving it a width to height of 1:1, and that means I can only get squares. And that remains true for using the oval tool as well. If I want to have circles, I can get a 1:1, and I'm going to have a perfect circle. But you could also have a 1:1.5 and get a constrained rectangular shape. So you can work with constraining the aspect ratio that way. A shape is great, but the more interesting elements to shapes is when we start filling it with color so that we can differentiate them on the canvas. So again, let's go to our color picker, and I'm going to choose sort of a blue color in the outer ring, and now I have a bunch of blues I can choose from. Oops, excuse me. In the outer ring, and now I can grab this circle and start to find the blue that I'm looking for, just kind of a royal blue. I'll click OK, and with my paint bucket tool, I'll fill that area, and now I have a rectangular shape. I'm going to click deselect all and grab my move tool up here, and now I can move this shape around. I can go to edit and say free transform, and when I do that I get a number of little squares here around the corners that will allow me to change proportions on my shape. And when I get to the corner here, I get this little circular arrow. I can grab it and I can start to turn. So edit free transform, and then asks you to apply the changes. Yes. When I do an edit free transform, that lets me change my shape. I can also do a free distort, and that kind of lets me warp an individual corner or aspect of the shape. So I can start to get strange polygons. Similar thing, when I click off of it, it asks me if I want to apply the changes. So I can say yes. So using the marquee tool, free transform, free distort, we can start to create interesting shapes. I can also use the marquee tool to select an area in my shape. Excuse me. Let's see. There we go. I'm going to choose this corner. And when I go to edit, cut, I can take part of my shape out. So you can hack away from shapes just as well as adding to shapes. I'm going to click undo, and we have this lasso tool. And when I click on this, edit, deselect all. The lasso, when I click down, lets me select areas that aren't straight lines. I can use my mouse and start to get more unique shapes selected, and then I can apply something. Now let's choose a different color and put the paint bucket, and I'll just paint right in here. And we get this interesting effect because they're in the same layer. Whereas if I create a new layer and then put another element over the top, choose a new tool, a new color, and do the paint bucket. Now I have a shape on its own unique layer, and I can move it around. Whereas because I put both of those elements on the same layer, they're stuck together. So what I suggest to you is as you're working with different elements, put them on different layers. That way you can manipulate a single element versus trying to have everything on the same layer until you're ready to commit to it, like we did with the photo elements layer. All of that's pretty much set the way we like it. Now let's take these two layers that we created with shapes and throw them in the trash. I'll select it and click the little trash icon, and I'll click this little trash icon. And hopefully you see how now with the marquee tool, the lasso tool, and some colors you can create shapes. I guess one last thing here, let me create a new layer. Just as we created rectangles, we can select the oval shape and do the same thing with circles. We can constrain the aspect ratio 1:1 to get circles, or we can say no restriction, and what we get instead are ovals. Let's bring back up our photo elements layer, and for this assignment or for this demo right here, I would like to add a few shapes and some text down here at the bottom. Now the shapes that I'm going to create here are a little more, instead of being design oriented, they're going to act, so I will choose the rectangle. It's going to act as a divider, so it's a little more layout oriented. I'm going to be sure that this shape here, which is my divider, is in layer number 7. I'm going to click my color, choose black, and using the paint bucket tool, I'm going to fill this divider. I'll call this, oops, move that back. The top divider. And I'm going to right click on this layer and duplicate it. And the duplicate I will call bottom divider. I'm going to grab my move tool, the arrow here. Deselect all. Now I have one on top of the other. And I can use my arrow keys to do some fine adjustments. Now my photographic elements, 2 dividers that I created as shapes. I'm going to click Save. Okay. Save, replace. Now the final requirement for this assignment is to utilize some text. The text tool you can find here, and it has an icon, the A. I'll click on it, and when you do that, you get a cursor. Your cursor sort of, it looks like this. I'm going to click. Now it opens my text window down here. I'm going to grab it and pull it up because it has this little widget has many choices. I enter my text into this box here. I'm going to click OLIT 522. Spring 2012. I like the font Verdana, but I could change others. 2 others. I'm going to increase the font size just a little bit, maybe to 40. I could also type in that number there. I can bold, italic, etc. I'm going to leave it, and I could change the color as well. But this looks good to me. I'm going to click OK. It's slightly off the screen, so I'm going to get my move tool and pull this element this way. Now I can use my arrow keys to do some fine tuning for the placement of that text. And notice that when I created that text, it added a whole new layer, and it gives it an A, which differentiates that from a layer with graphical elements. I can pull my layers down, and we're starting to see we have a number of layers: our dividers, our photo elements, the background, and the text. And I think that's about it for this tutorial. We've created a canvas size that's 1280 by 720. We brought in some photographic elements that we cropped to fit the canvas. We duplicated layers, created sort of a heavy focus effect by giving one layer a hard light and making it black and white, making it slightly transparent over the top of the color layer. Then we created a gradient up here at the top to give it that feeling of fading up into black. Then we use the marquee tool to create some shapes for dividers. And we use the text tool to add a little bit of text. I'm going to go to File, Save. This graphic fulfills all the elements of the assignment. You can fulfill the elements of the assignment any way you like. Please just be sure that there's some photographic elements involved, some gradients, some shapes, and some text. So feel free to be as creative as you want to be. I'm going to require that you submit the .pxd file to me, but I would also like for you to go to File, Save, and save a JPEG version of your final graphic, and go ahead and save that at 100% quality. Click OK. Save that in that same folder. So you will submit to me both the PXD and a JPEG version of your final graphic project. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Otherwise, happy image editing. Thanks.